Jenny, it's lovely to be able to have this conversation. I think it's a very important one. You work in an area which should be absolutely amazing to all of us to think that it's necessary to have people working in that area, modern day slavery.
Yeah, and it's a surprise to me too. I mean, I didn't, go to school or grow up thinking, I want to be an anti-slavery abolitionist, person fighting for justice in my community on an issue that I thought was ended, so many years ago. So, yeah, it's funny, you sort of end up in these situations, I guess when something speaks to you personally.
I can relate to that, and I think people listening to what we're talking about in this conversation piece, you and the others, hopefully they'll hear a lot and that will stir them up as well. We forget in this young country that at the time that Australia was being settled, slavery was an accepted part of the global order. They were kept everywhere. Africans traded amongst themselves. They sold slaves to the British, who sent them to America, and the Americans owned and used slaves. Every country seemed to think it was all right. And then along came the abolitionists, you used that word a moment ago, spearheaded in Great Britain by William Wilberforce, who was a remarkable member of Parliament, but backed by very wealthy people and so forth. They so succeeded, although it was an unbelievable battle for many years, that in a way their greatest success was that they changed the global mindset. So slavery went from being part of the accepted order to something that's repugnant. So now to find that it's not dead should be fully repugnant.
Yeah, and I think, it's interesting you bring up the historical references. And when I moved to Australia 14, 15 years ago, and I used the word slavery and I talked about, doing anti-slavery works, people said to me, you can't use that term here. Australians don't have a history of slavery and, people don't know what slavery is here. And I thought, oh, well, what about all of the Pacific Islanders that were blackbirded here? What about all of the Aboriginal people who were put into domestic slavery and slavery in a whole range of industries? So it is interesting too, in terms of when we're talking about what is the historical context country by country. Australia also does have a history of slavery that I think it still needs to reckon with, that I think it still needs to recognize, remember, and redress. And we need to have that link. We need to have that link in our modern movement as well.
I think that's a really important point. I want to draw something out here. Sometimes we are very smug in our assumptions that we are superior to those who have gone before us. In fact, the sailing orders for the very first fleet that came to Australia, and indeed Captain Phillip, who headed up the expedition, clearly stated there were to be no slaves in the new colony. And yet, in some ways, we regressed with things like the Kanakas in Queensland. And we now find, as you say, we've got this unbelievable problem of modern day slavery. So staggeringly, globally, we find an estimate of 45 to 50 million slaves, and we have our share of them in Australia.
Yeah, and the numbers are not easy, to quantify, and we're relying on numbers from the Global Slavery Index and from the International Labour Organization and the IOM and all these global organizations that deal with migration and labor and migration for labor. And I think it's really important to recognize how migration and labor and our policies around those things, including our trade policies and our economic policies, also can facilitate people ending up in slavery all around the world every day. So whilst it's, whilst it's a crime that is also taking place between an individual victim and a perpetrator, we also really need to think on the very big scale policy level about how our policies are perhaps enabling this horrendous crime against a person to take place, and how are we facilitating a system that enables people to do this to other people. It's a big policy issue.
It's a big policy issue. Now, let's unpack a bit of that. I hope this doesn't sound trite, but I think it's a really interesting question. It's a truly appalling thing, I would think, to be enslaved, but I wonder what in the end is the most degrading, being kept as a slave or keeping another human being as a slave. I mean, how degraded do you have to be to think that you can own and trade and abuse as a goods and a chattel, or a chattel, rather than a human being, another person.
Well, I mean, it's been with us, I think, since the beginning of time, and there are those who are going to take those opportunities. And there are opportunities to do it, and to make a profit or have some gain or some raising of your status. It's not always about money. It can be about other advantages that you get. But it's because there is the opportunity. So we really need to start thinking about how we can shut down these opportunities, and to really, we need some culture shift, particularly in a place like Australia. We really need to shift our cultural thinking around particularly migrants. So in Australia, we're talking a lot around, with this issue, we're speaking mostly around migrant workers, temporary visa holders that come to our country who contribute immensely to our economy, which is not a lot that we actually hear about. We don't hear a lot about the incredible gift that migrant workers are to our economy. We mostly hear about illegal workers, and we are very focused on deporting them as soon as possible. And I'm pretty confident that we're deporting victims every day in this country.
Right. Let's tease out the cultural issue a bit. The great movement against slavery, it was actually firstly against the slave trade, which was even crueler than slavery, when you look at the death rates and so forth of the sea crossings in dreadfully overcrowded ships with hopeless diets and no sanitation and whatever, indescribably evil. But in many ways, given the vested economic interests in slavery, it was only when the people of Great Britain understood that this frightful thing was going on, and it was so much worse than they thought, that the vested interests were overcome. So a very big part of the task in Australia, I think, is to get people really aware there is a human rights travesty going on in our country, which is a blot on all of us until we get rid of it. And I've no doubt Australians will want to get rid of it. But you know, it's an interesting little, I think history's fascinating. The women who were supporting Wilberforce in his drive against slavery instituted an economic boycott. It's not a new idea. They stopped serving sugar if it had been produced by slaves. They actually got to the issue of slavery being used in the supply chain of sugar and wouldn't buy it anymore. Those sorts of things really started to tell a powerful story. So Jenny, it is complicated. No one wants to buy a product, no decent person wants to buy products that have involved, or services that have involved slave labour. To help us box this so we can understand a little more of the complexities we're dealing with, you're on the front line in a way that I think is remarkable and I think tremendous. But give us a feel for the sort of people you're working with and how you help them. And through that, perhaps illustrate something of the problem and how it plays out.
So when we're talking about modern slavery, we're talking about a range of practices. So modern slavery itself is not an actual legal term. It's an umbrella term for everything ranging from slavery, where someone is actually treated like chattel, like an object for sale and purchase, where all of their rights have been removed from them, and they are literally owned or totally unfree and under the control of another person. We also have trafficking in persons, which involves the recruiting and harboring of people for the purpose of exploitation, and those people are controlled through threats of violence, actual violence, manipulation, lies. That we have the situation of forced labor, where someone is forced to work under the threat of something bad happening, and that something bad happening could be many, many different things. We have a situation called debt bondage, which is where someone is working for someone else to service a debt that they have somehow incurred, and the cycle of that debt is such that they can never really actually get out of the debt, because it keeps accruing faster than they can ever pay it off. So, you know, the term modern slavery encompasses a whole range of these practices where exploitation is a key element. And again, that's why I'm saying the link to exploitation is so crucial. But it's where that exploitation is maintained through violence or lies and threats, and the person feels that they are unable to leave that exploitative situation. So we're not talking about the person working for $10 an hour in a food court, maybe in breach of their visa conditions, but they're free to go. They can quit that job tomorrow if they don't want to accept those conditions anymore. We're talking about the person who is in a work situation where they are unfree to leave because someone is using some sort of standover tactic to keep them making money for them in this exploitative situation. Some of the scenarios that we have responded to here in Australia are in industries like hospitality, construction, strangely, industries people wouldn't even be thinking about where there are vulnerable workers, things like recycling and waste, domestic work. So I think a lot of Australians would be surprised to think that there are domestic workers out in our community living in private homes with families who are actually domestic slaves. They may be passed off as a cousin or an auntie or a visiting relative, but once we sort of get people aware and they start becoming a little bit more observing of that person's freedom of movement, they might see that that person actually is unfree, and they may even reach out to that person. Obviously, the sex industry is an area that has received a lot of attention over the last 10, 15 years, and that's because Australia's response initially was very focused on the sex industry and was designed to uncover and investigate and prosecute perpetrators in the sex industry. So our entire response was geared towards that industry. And again, there are vulnerable workers working in that industry. We've definitely seen a lot of exploitation in our agricultural sector and horticultural sector, including, meat packing, so kind of the food industry overall. Again, thinking about what do we see in the headlines every day, and we see many, many tales of exploitation going on of temporary workers. So again, we're talking about scenarios where someone, for example, a woman migrates to Australia for marriage, and when she gets here, she finds out that this person that she thought loved her and that she was going to build a life with and have a family with, has actually married her for the purpose of using her in a cleaning business where she is not paid, where she's forced to work 6 days a week, and where that's not really the purpose of why she was married to this person. So she was deceived.
And some hold is put over her so she can't go to the police or report it?
So, shame.
Shame.
I mean, shame is a really powerful, yes, there's often threats of deportation, threats of violence, threats against family members
Withholding
in
of
home
passports?
countries, withholding of passports. Again, the debt issue, I spent money to bring you here and you have to pay that back. And for the person in that situation, again, you have to look at underlying vulnerabilities of so many migrants from other places in the world where things may not be great and where they don't have good opportunities. Underlying vulnerabilities combined with, threats, debts, withholding of identity can create a situation where that person feels unfree, even though we may objectively say, well, there was no lock on the door. Nobody fenced you in. Nobody was
They're not in chains.
armed. They're not in chains. So people can find themselves in a prison without walls. And the prison without walls, the bricks of that prison are made with things that that I've just described. The debt, the threat, the actual violence. There is actual violence. The threats of police coming to get you, and that if the police come, bad things will happen. And for a lot of people, they haven't had good experiences with the police in their home country, so that threat, is very real. So the prison without walls can be made of lots of things. And that combined with, some of those bricks are the underlying vulnerabilities of where that person has come from in their own life experience, their lack of awareness of their rights, their lack of understanding of our laws here and what might be available to assist them. Language is often a huge barrier. The fear of the unknown, it's very hard, even though there's not a lock on the door, it still can be very hard to walk through that door because you don't know what is actually going to happen on the other side.
Obviously, we want to preserve completely the anonymity of anyone who's been caught in this. But it was a surprise for me because quite recently, probably the first survivor that I've met turned out to be a great big strong man, not the sort of man you'd muck around with.
Yeah.
But that prison without walls had been tight enough to have seen him lose quite a few years in what can only be described as slavery.
Sure. Look, there's a very well publicized case here in Australia involving 4 professional boxers that were brought over from the Philippines and used as domestic workers. Again, it breaks the stereotype of who we think can be a victim. These were boxers. These were strong guys that could knock you out and knock you off of your feet. And yet, underlying vulnerabilities that I mentioned and fear of the unknown and a lack of understanding of how they could leave this situation and be supported by anyone. The power of shame for men and women is very, very strong. And think about that for a man who may have been recruited or, lured here by what they thought was going to be a really good opportunity to take care of their family members, and then they find themselves here powerless and at the mercy of someone, and that they've been tricked, and that they've been the victim of a bait and switch scheme. Imagine the shame involved in that when you're expected to provide and be a breadwinner and support your family and people are counting on you back home. So shame is also, a very powerful tool that slaveholders can wield. And that makes it really difficult can make it difficult in the recovery process. So when people come out of their slavery situation, just, dealing with that shame and kind of getting over that and unpacking that with someone that they weren't the person that was in the wrong. So the power of shame. And obviously for women, the power of shame, especially if there was physical and sexual abuse, can play a big role in creating a nexus of harm for them if they were to return home and people know what was to happen to them. So we have a really big obligation to protect people because the power of shame is so strong around the world that if we return someone, they could lose their life because shame is that powerful in their culture.
As you say, it's not easy, it's complicated, and no 2 cases, I suppose, are the same, although there would be patterns. The remarkable work that you and your team are doing, one-on-one, could you give us a cameo of a wonderful success story where you've really been able to help someone? What did it look like, and how did they transition through and find their freedom again? And perhaps one where, tragically, it's gone wrong.
The main story that comes to my mind is of a domestic worker from the Pacific Islands who was enslaved here with a local suburban family who had kids, going to a local high school, who were, people in the community, and they lured her over from their country, from her country. She worked for them for 3 years without pay. She had been promised, a decent job, what she thought was a legitimate job, the opportunity to migrate permanently to Australia. And this was very, very important to her because she was a single mother and she had a child who was unwell. So to be able to buy him medicine and then to have the opportunity to migrate permanently, that was a really important opportunity for her. So she came here fully believing that this was a legitimate opportunity. But when she arrived, her passport was taken away from her for processing with immigration, which was not what was actually happening. And she was working every day, 12 to 16 hours a day for this family in their home, taking care of everyone and everything. Everything from the swimming pool to the gardening to even painting, even like carpentry, taking care of animals, taking care of children, cleaning, cooking, and doing the shopping as well with the lady of the house. So again, there was no lock on the door, and she did go out with the lady of the house and was hidden in plain sight in some ways at the supermarket and when running other errands. But over time, she was becoming increasingly unwell. She had her own medical issues.
And the child?
Well, there was no money. There was no payment. So she was being paid nothing. And when she would ask about that, she was being told, later, we're not going to pay you now. You need to just keep working, and we'll eventually pay you, and we're also processing your visa, and that's costing money and all that kind of thing. So over time, she decided that she needed to ask for help from someone. Now, this was a household where there were visitors also who could see that she was not a cousin or an auntie. And she actually reached out to one of the visitors at one point, and she was able to escape from that house. We're not exactly sure how, but immigration and the federal police were able to go to the house and remove her from that situation, and then she came to live in our refuge. So she was in that situation for 3 years with no pay. Imagine that. And the passport was never sent to immigration. It was located pretty immediately in the shirt pocket of the man of the house, hanging up in the closet. So this was a woman who had been working every day, not received any money, was unable to contact her family members without being supervised, was not allowed out of the house except accompanied by the people who lived there. And she took that chance, took that leap of faith, that if she reached out for help, something good would happen. And it was lucky for her that the right people came to investigate her situation, and that the right response was there in order to get her the help that she needed.
So this lady finally escapes. How does it end?
So unfortunately, there was no criminal prosecution in that case due to the difficulties of one victim against multiple witnesses. Prosecutions are a challenge when there's one victim and their story is difficult to corroborate. Nevertheless, she was able to access Australia's anti-slavery framework. And the good news is that we do have a framework, and that includes opportunities for people to permanently stay in Australia. So she was able to permanently stay in Australia, start her life over. She's been able to earn money and provide for her family members back in her home country. And she's married. She's an older lady, and it's nice to see that she's been able to find someone and marry later in life. And she remarkably is an advocate on this issue, and is someone who wants to see Australia keep improving its response. So she is someone that speaks out on these issues, speaks publicly on these issues.
Well done. The horror story, what can go wrong? I guess the worst thing is to be caught in this and no one ever finds out, and you die in slavery.
I think the worst thing that can go wrong is what's going wrong every day. I think there are cases where law enforcement are not effectively being able to screen for human trafficking and slavery across a range of industries on a regular basis, because the focus is so much on rapid removal of unlawful workers that we're not creating that right opportunity for someone to be able to articulate that they have been in slavery, and that there are a lot of people falling through the gaps, and that it's taking place in the agricultural sector, in hospitality, maybe even in manufacturing, retail, across a range of industries where we know there are vulnerable temporary workers who may become unlawful. And this is what we really, really need to change. We need to change the mindset around rapid removal. And our focus shouldn't be on what someone's visa status shouldn't be on what someone's visa status is. It should be on, are they a victim? And we need to create better opportunities for victims to be able to safely tell someone what's happened to them and how they found themselves to be in the situation that they're in.
There are those who say that we would do well to adopt British-style legislation, so-called chain of responsibility laws, which mean that a company importing goods or services for sale in Australia would have an independent umpire, if you like, an ombudsman, check their supply chains to make certain that their products, as they're, if you like, put through the manufacturing and the export processes and so forth, don't involve slave labour. Would that be useful in Australia?
So in 2016, our Australian Freedom Network, which is a network of 18 heads of faith that have come together to address modern slavery collaboratively, we called for a Modern Slavery Act for Australia. And in 2017, the government conducted probably the most comprehensive review of Australia's response to slavery ever. And the inquiry committee came down with 49 recommendations that do support a Modern Slavery Act for Australia, similar to the UK Act, but with some marked improvements. So in 2018, think about this is quite a short time period actually. We do expect that there will be legislation before the Australian Parliament, and that 2018 will be a landmark year for Australia, and that a Modern Slavery Act will be introduced. And what will be included in that will be a reporting requirement for Australian business to be able to be publicly available, and it will articulate what those businesses are doing to address modern slavery in all of its forms within their supply chains domestically and overseas.
Domestically and overseas.
That's right.
So that might be another mechanism for the much quicker identification of people in this country who are being ensnared.
Yes, and at least it's proactive. So, many anti-slavery responses around the world, including our own, they're more reactive. We need to be proactive, and business has been a missing piece of the anti-slavery pie for a number of years. So it's really important for them to come on board. I'm confident that Australian business is keen to get on board. They don't want slavery in their supply chains. I think where they're struggling with is how do they address this, in a very, very complex, business, some of which might have 20 or 30,000 suppliers, multi-tiered down the line. But I'm confident that Australian business can engage and will want to engage and can start to proactively tackle this problem. So, we do need to connect that very top, and it's not just business, it's investors as well. Investors have a keen interest, and even government too. Government supply chains will not be precluded from reporting as well. So everyone really needs to start proactively looking, and it's a positive step. The Modern Slavery Act is not a silver bullet for this issue, but it is definitely going to be a key driver and a game changer in terms of bringing in a whole new sector into this anti-slavery space. Now, the role of the Ombudsman. So we have asked for an anti-slavery commissioner to oversight, monitor, and evaluate Australia's entire response. The role of the commissioner, to be clear, is not to police business. And Kevin Hyland, the UK anti-slavery commissioner, has provided really significant input and came as a witness for the inquiry here in Australia. And he's been very clear that he does not think that an independent commissioner should have that role, and we agree. We agree with him. We need an independent person who can be a critical friend to Australia's response, including to the NGOs, including to business, including to the government, including to law enforcement and all the actors who have carriage over the response. We need someone independent who can help to set the agenda and drive the agenda. And so we have called for that, and I believe the Australian government will create and appoint that role as part of a forthcoming Modern Slavery Act for this country. So we want transparency for business to report, and an independent commissioner. Those are our key asks, and I expect that the Australian government will draft legislation this year.
Jenny, many people hearing us talk here will be asking themselves the question that I'm asking. What can I do, both at a practical level and in terms of hounding my local member or thinking about how I might vote?
So, I mean, we certainly would encourage people to get educated about this issue and, get onto the websites and the email lists and the social media of organizations like ours that are really, we really are at the forefront of driving the response. Our response in this country has come from the community, getting involved and demanding a response. So get involved, and when we ask you to do something, do it. And literally, it might be to click here. So we really want to encourage people to use the social media channels that we've created, and when we ask you to do something, do it. When we ask you to contact your local member for a particular reason, please do it. As you would know, politicians are not necessarily moved by 1 million people. They can even be moved by 50 or 100 people contacting their office.
No, can I tell you, I've been one. It only takes 1 or 2 or 3 thoughtful letters that are self-evidently researched and serious to get half-serious MP thinking. It doesn't take much. It just has to be real.
That's right. And so the community organizations that are gathering the evidence, and those were the invisible people behind Wilberforce. They're the ones who compiled the evidence that he needed to go and make the change. Well, that's who we are. That's what the NGOs are doing. That's what the unions are doing. That's what lots of people on the ground who've dedicated themselves to this work are doing. And we're packaging it up so that the people can move and do something with it when we say green light. So get yourself involved, get engaged, and I think, it's interesting in thinking about the woman who is the domestic worker. She says, know who your neighbor is. Her neighbors in this house where she was enslaved for 3 years, they didn't know her. So she says, know who your neighbor is. And I think the message there is, don't be afraid to also reach out to people in the community who may be hidden in plain sight, that could be in slavery. Now, that doesn't mean I'm telling everyone to go and, run around to every migrant that you see and ask them if they're in slavery. But be aware and alert to the signs and do something with the information that you have if you have information that concerns you. We do get calls from members of the public that have led to people being taken out of slavery. So be alert, be aware. If you have information, don't sit on it. Do something with it. You can call us and tell us your information, and we will help you assess what to do with that information. That may lead to someone becoming free. The woman who I mentioned who was in domestic servitude, she appeared on a television program, and another domestic worker in slavery saw her on TV and reached out to us for help and became free.
Yeah.
So that power, of just, people being able to hear stories, share stories, it's crucial. I'm not going to tell people that they should boycott retailers. The issue of supply chains is complex. What you should be doing if you have concerns about a product or a service that you're consuming is go onto social media and ask that company, what are they doing to address exploitation, slavery, and human trafficking in their supply chain?
I'd only urge that people use decency in that. It's very easy for these things to get out of control.
Sure.
And someone who's innocent can be accused of doing something horrendous. Having said that...
What I'm saying is, ask the questions and...
But ask them in a way that doesn't get a scare campaign going, is the only thing I'm saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
we want business to know, business needs to know that you care about these issues. And that will help these issues be raised at the very highest levels within a business. And if we have legislation coming in 2018, that's going to be a big driver for business to engage. But business needs feedback from their customers.
Well, Jenny, thank you very much. What you do is tremendously important. I admire you for it, and I'm sure all of those who know what you do and what your team do admire you for it, and we want to support you in that.